you right up front, and this is kind of for EdFi, and definitely since my days of being a part of the EdFi team, this work looks like a technology project because there's a database server and there's a web server and there's these configurations that you go through. So it looks like a technology project. It also looks like an integration project, like we're just trying to connect all these systems and get data flowing. But I will tell you, if you only look at it that way, you're going to miss an opportunity for some transformation and probably for delivering some early wins. And so what we have learned the hard way over the years, and actually FLCODE has helped us with this because they've definitely given us a lot of lessons learned, a lot of implementation realities. They've informed our roadmap priorities, all kinds of good things, because they've been plugging away at this for 5 years now, and they just learned a lot as they've onboarded all these 21 districts. What we've learned is to really try to dial into a narrowly defined and specific use case that allows you to answer some essential question that you've got in your district, like, are my students making progress? Which is usually something that uses assessment data from multiple sources. Or are my kids at risk of becoming chronically absent? Which is usually about real-time attendance data and being able to track towards metrics, whether it's excused or unexcused absences, or remote learners, or in-person, synchronous, asynchronous, all of those kind of realities, in order to knit together something that puts that bite-sized piece of information in front of the right person at the right time so they can take action on it, like a counselor or an assistant principal, if it's the chronic absenteeism one. And so this notion of start small but think big is really about, if we can help you define and really tackle that specific narrow use case, unlock some valuable data and an insight that's kind of connected to an action that you take with it for some role or some set of users in your district, then you've got a toehold to go tackle priority 2 and 3 on through 100, right? And FLCODE has been a great example of that, because they've kind of built up a whole library of data solutions and tools in addition to the ones that the EdFi Alliance provides for the whole community. Oh, and it looks like we've got some more folks in the lobby. Nicole, would you mind manning the admitting button for the new folks who want to join? Appreciate that. So these are some things that we commonly see, like no judgment here, right? Like lots of folks struggle with these things. I know I did in my districts over the years too. These are the kinds of data realities that a lot of folks are dealing with across their systems. We've implemented tons of technology in our schools, right? And so we have all these point solutions. They have valuable data in them. You can get to them. You may have challenges. You may have a hard time knitting it together. You may not have a lot of time to do that if you're a principal or a classroom teacher or a counselor, people who have a lot of things on their plate, right? And so our IT environment, tends to look something like this, where we have some on-prem, we have some SaaS, we have some cloud-based stuff. We have a whole lot of these like point-to-point connections that usually require a person. They usually require somebody like a database administrator or some other data input type person to get data from one place to another, to massage it, to do those ETL, those extract, transform, load type operations, scripting and querying and FTPing and all of that stuff, which you can do, but when you keep on adding systems and not sunsetting them, and I don't know if your district is like mine, but like we didn't sunset a lot, we added tons over the years. It just becomes unsustainable, right? And you don't typically have a lot of leeway for adding FTEs to be able to keep throwing people at that problem. And so what we're focused on in this community, this EdFi Alliance nationwide community, of which FLCODE and the members are a really important part, is this statement right here. We are trying to take the manual and the people and the siloed aspects of this problem out of the equation. And that's why everything that we do, which is backed by nonprofit philanthropic dollars by the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation and by the Gates Foundation, that's why all of that stuff is made available to anyone who wants to utilize it at no cost. because we're simply trying to get this problem solved, which is real-time data bidirectionally flowing across your applications so that you can actually use it and get the most value out of all of this work that you've done to implement these different solutions for problems. And so what that looks like, just at a real high level, is you can utilize this enterprise grade tool called an operational data store, which allows you to get out of the position of having to deal with siloed systems in order to unlock data to put into it's essentially just a big database, right? It's not to get more complicated than it is. It's essentially a database, but it's one that you control, and it's one that gets updates, and that vendors can write their client APIs to be able to send data to or get data from in real time, right? So that as soon as something happens, that can be registered in your comprehensive set of data that you have that's informed from these different source systems that you've got. That's the idea, is to put the data under your control so that you can use it in an agile way to power those. I think it was it Alachua that was describing, like, you've got all of these reports from Crystal that you're trying to migrate over time to Power BI, probably because you need them to be, like, you want to leverage a tool you've invested in, I'm betting. You probably have invested a lot of training in it too, but I'm betting another part of that is you need to be agile and nimble because of all the requirements that come up sometimes very quickly, like in a pandemic, for being able to report on the things that you need to report on, or analyze what you need to analyze, or intervene where you need to intervene, right? And if I make any assumptions that are wrong, jump in and correct me.
Nope, you're spot on. Plus more.
Don't let me be a know-it-all, though. I've just lived a lot of that, and continue to with all of these. Like, kind of our colleagues become our friends in this work. We share an awful lot. So definitely in the trenches with you, even though you guys are front lines on it. One other way to kind of pivot the view of what this sort of looks like, and maybe this is a good visual for Tina in Volusia, is another way to look at this is, you've got on the left, you've got all these source systems that are super valuable for various things. You've got your student information system, like your focus system, or like the EduPoint Synergy SIS that Jason represents on the call, right? There's a lot of super valuable information in that source in particular. You also, though, probably really care about things like benchmark, interim assessment data from the provider that you use for that. Maybe you use NWEA, or maybe you do district local benchmarks, let's say. There are a lot of other valuable systems that may be siloed in your organization, or that you may just like have a tremendous amount of work trying to integrate in your own ways. The idea is that we can give source system vendors a clear specification that is defined and agreed upon by a community. You all get a seat at the table for this work. But at the end of the day, when you define what that standard needs to describe, right, that becomes a clear specification that we can hand to a Jason or to a Focus or to folks like that and say, we ask that you support this because we're trying to solve problem XYZ for our learners. And they build what's called an API client, an application programming interface. I'm sure lots of folks on this call use those already, maybe proprietary ones by certain vendors. This is an open source one that's available to anybody to use at no cost. And so these source system vendors build a client for calling and utilizing that API sort of wrapper around the operational data store that now sits in your environment, or there's cloud-based options for those, and there's partners that provide them. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can stand that up. The Florida Code Collaborative provides that in a number of different ways. But utilizing those client APIs, those source systems can now send data that's valuable and that you need into that operational data store. They can also call and get data from that client and from that ODS in order to update things like rosters or you name it, right? There's different kinds of information that can go both ways. And then downstream to the right, this is where that Alachua work comes in. And you all probably have some vision of this in your district, which is now I've got this rich set of data that's informed by multiple sources. It's very current, like it's either real time or very close to real time. And now I've got a layer of analytics that I can run against that data to be able to derive insights out of it that I can go put into people's hands to take action on. One specific thing I'm going to call out here, this just to get a little nerdy for a minute, just because I know it's of interest to at least Alachua, but probably others. You see on the right-hand side, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse in the shared screen mode, but over on the right of the ODS, where you have that API kind of dotted line and circle, and then the data visualization tools to the right, just know that there's a layer in between there that might be really interesting to you. And I'd be happy to follow up with you after the session if you want to learn more about it. But it's called the analytics middle tier. And what this is you think about this purple circle here, this ODS has got a bunch of raw granular data in it, right? Like tons of raw granular data in it. To make use of that, you've got to have some chops, right? You've got to be able to do some database joins, and you've got to know what's in there. Like you've got to have a sense of the complexity of that. The analytics middle tier that we built is a set of denormalized views that we've built several different use cases into, and we can continue to add to it for things like chronic absenteeism, college readiness, things like that. Equity is actually one of the new ones that we're building for Leon County to be shared for other Florida Code districts. But the idea is that analytics middle tier abstracts all that complexity, and you don't have to know all of the database structures and how to do a join properly or have those really complex queries. It allows you to literally like point your BI tool at it, your Power BI or your Tableau or whatever you utilize, and consume the data through those pre-populated views. So it takes a lot of the complexity away, and it really kind of unlocks this functionality and usefulness of the data for people like your data visualization folks, your business analysts, you may have different roles or titles for those people. But if that's of interest, let me know, and I'd be happy, because I'd be happy to follow up with you as a specific thing to dive deeper into, or just to shoot you some resources to read up on it. It's not in the diagram very clearly though, so I wanted to make sure to call it out since there's some interest on the call about that specific kind of functionality, I think. The last thing I'll add on this slide is this data visualization piece over on the far right. Think of this as a library of small data tools. That's where we've seen a lot of success is we have priority use cases that we support the field in that are great entry points to get started with this work. I think I've mentioned chronic absenteeism probably 3 or 4 times already in this chat. That's one of them, and that's a great place to start because it's just a ubiquitous problem. Everybody needs to be on top of that. It's important for a number of reasons, and it's a straightforward thing to implement because it's a one source system, it's one domain of data, and it's a really good place to start kind of building your Ed5 muscles or your interoperability muscles. But in addition to that one, we've got 5 other priority use cases that we are building out tools and supports for, and they're kind of think of them like little open source data tool products that you're welcome to make use of. Harnessing assessment data, utilizing multiple measures assessment data is another one. College and career and military readiness, or CCMR, is another one. Strengthening family engagement. I'll show you these on the website here in a minute if you want to see them. But family engagement or strengthening family engagement is another one. And then equity, I mentioned a moment ago, this is coming out of the Leon County project. And what they have defined in their business requirements that we're now utilizing to kind of tool up for other folks to make use of is it also meets the requirements for the Florida accountability reporting around equity and equitable access. And so that one might be of interest to you because there will be more support coming out for that very shortly, like in the Q3 timeframe, like July. Maybe I think July 31st is the date that we have projected for making that available. And so I'd be happy to share some more info on that if that's useful for you. And then one other one that Troy mentioned in his general remarks chat is LMS student engagement, student participation. There will be a starter kit around that because that's become such a big priority for all of us too. I'd be happy to dive into any of those that y'all want to learn more about. Let me pause for a second. I'm doing a lot of talking. Is this useful? Do you want to keep going down this track, or have I mentioned anything that you want to dive into more? Okay, hearing none, we'll keep plowing through here. And I'm going to go a little quick through some of these things because I want to spend some time on showing you these actual tools, just so you know it's not vaporware and it's not a theory of something we could do, but it's actually stuff you can put your hands on today. These are just some of the benefits that we see once people get over the hump of notching a win, you know, like delivering something and getting past the deployment stage into the actual use of data stage. These are the kinds of benefits that we see folks realizing, especially as they move forward into use case 2, 3, 4, and beyond. High level, what does the EdFi Alliance do? Three things really is what it boils down to. I mentioned that you all get a seat at the table. Anybody who wants to participate, this is an open source community, so anybody who wants to participate can. You get access to all of the stuff. All you do is sign up for a community account, which provisions you into a bunch of resources and things. But that first icon, the values and scale icon, that really refers to the logical work that we do together. We come together through a variety of like community work groups and special interest groups and things like that. There's a whole framework for those things, but we come together to basically like discuss, debate, and then agree on the best way to define our data together in a way that benefits all of us and that helps us with the priorities that we're trying to tackle. So that's the logical work, is defining what are the domains of data, what are the entities, what are their attributes, how are they associated with each other, right? That's that logical data modeling kind of work that we do together. And then the middle thing that we do is there's a bunch of technology tools that the EdFi Alliance builds. There's a whole tech team with some really, really quality, sharp people on it and teams of contractors behind them that deliver regular updates, usually on a quarterly basis, sometimes more frequently than that, to this whole array of tools available to you. We looked at the ODS API a minute ago. That's the centerpiece of it. But then there's a bunch of other things. There's data import tools. There's mapping tools. There's all kinds of things. Admin apps for making the administration of it really, really simplified and straightforward. Those things are all maintained, updated, secured, patched, you name it. All of those kinds of things are supported in regular releases. But then there's a lot of community sourced tools that are shared as well. We have a thing called like a repository called the EdFi Exchange, which sort of has like GitHub repos behind it, if you're familiar with GitHub and have used it before. But it's essentially like a whole bunch of tools that have come out of the field, including some from FLCODE, that people come up with a solution based on the data standard and they release it for other folks to make use of. And so it's this growing library of technology tools that are at your disposal. And then the last thing, the community piece, Sharad talked a lot about this in the general session. This is like the biggest professional learning community, the biggest PLC you've ever been a part of. And we use Slack and other tools like that to be able to connect peer to peer. And there's I can virtually guarantee that there's probably at least some other org or folks in the community that are trying to tackle something that you're trying to tackle. And so you can either bounce ideas off of them, you can find out how they went about it, you can collaborate and huddle on a way to do it. Sometimes that turns into a special interest group, or it seeds some other kind of conversation for that governance structure I talked about with the community work groups. There's a bunch of good stuff that comes from it, but basically, like, you're not alone. There's a power in numbers effect to this, and that's where that community piece comes in. Does that all make sense to everybody in terms of like, what is EdFi? What does EdFi do? What do I get from it? Hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to whip through this because I think that's probably self-evident, and it'll be in the deck that Nicole will help me share with you. I think we've also probably talked about this. Maybe the one thing I would highlight on this slide that I haven't really set out right yet is, I think back to my CIO days in my school districts, and I was always trying to find opportunities for future proofing. You know, like, had funding right now might not have the same level of funding later. How do I make decisions that will stick, that'll be sustainable, that I don't have to keep hiring FTEs to be able to manage? Like, I can actually take this on with the current kind of staffing that I've got. This is an open source initiative, and there are so many people contributing to it that your risks continue to be decreased by doing something that a whole community of folks is also doing. The clarity for vendors is getting better and better all the time as we help equip you to make a good vendor ask and kind of a concise, concisely conveying your requirements to your vendors, like Jason and the Oregon Nexus folks I mentioned earlier with synergy needs that those districts had. When we can converge around a practice and a priority and give a good, clear requirement to a vendor, that's a win for everybody, right? It's a win for you because you solve a problem for kids, for learners, or for educators. It's a win for the vendor because you're getting even more value out of their system and out of the data that is updated and created there. And it's reusable for them. That's the idea, is replicability. Like, what that solution and what worked for you can be utilized by another, and that's the promise of portable code for the vendors as well, right? And so there's a big part of this that is a sustainability and future-proofing argument it's compelling, and I would encourage you to think about that piece, because I know every one of you is that's a lens you have to look at your work through in some way or another. Troy showed you this before. I won't spend any more time on it. This is just a snapshot of like who is participating in this community. The blue states, the blue shaded states, are the state departments of ed that have joined the community, and they're at some stage of their implementation or phasing in their implementation or coming up with their plan to do so. The blue dots are individual LEAs and school districts that have decided to implement EdFi in their district, whether or not their state is. And then the orange ones are potentially you, right? This is the Florida Code and the education Nexus up in Oregon, and the Insight Collaborative in Indiana, the Michigan Data Hub. These are all districts that are banding together, sometimes with an educational service agency at the center, like a hub and spoke, sometimes not, sometimes peer-to-peer, but it's groups of districts that are working together to lighten their load and kind of go far together. We've talked through this already. I think we've talked through this enough. That I think we've talked through. I'm noting how repetitive some of my content is. Sorry. A little real-time editorializing. But I wanted to jump ahead to actually show you some of these tools, many of which have been harvested from the field. So here's some example screenshots. This is an early warning system, Power BI tool snapshot that's based on the Balfon's model of ABC, attendance, behavior, and course grades, the ABCs that make up that early warning system definition. This has actually been around in the community for quite a while, and it's gone through some refreshing. But it essentially gives, like, if you can picture, right now we're on the school tab. If you can picture being a, let's see, the enrollment for this school is 555. So let's say that's like a elementary school, you know, or maybe it's a middle school, judging from the grade levels that are in this table here. So we'll call it a middle school. But if you can imagine being a principal or an assistant principal, you've got these 555 kids, which is a lot of kids to know well, right? Lots of times middle schools get way bigger than that. Like the one my kiddos went to was about 1,200 kids. High school, you know, maybe like 3 times that. So having the ability to see where generally or globally my kids and my groups of kids are, like my student population trends of who's on track and looking good, that's 62% of my kids. Who's kind of in that starting to worry a little bit about you because you're drifting off into at risk for some category, for some reason or another, is the yellow. And that's about 1/4 of my kids in this case. And then my full on, boy, I've got kids in crisis that are really, really at risk, and I need to intervene. I need to find some ways to engage them and help them in the ways that I can. That's the idea, is like to give you those like at a glance where am I at sort of understandings, with the ability to drill down into the specifics of groups of kids, like maybe this at-risk category. I can go sort this by my 8th graders, let's just say as an example, and then maybe with my counselor who focuses on the 8th grade caseload, I can really design a targeted intervention for that group of kids, just as an example. This is another view. It's basically like same data, just rendered differently. And that's part of the beauty behind Alacho, I'll go back to you again for a minute about what you're trying to do is sort of move these maybe more rigid reports out of Crystal or you know, more of a legacy environment into something that is maybe allows you to be more nimble or more flexible and portray the data in the way that your end users, like in a way that resonates the most with them. And probably act on feedback from them. Like if you put a draft of one of these tools into their hands and they tell you, well, that's pretty good, but I would really love to be able to do X, Y, Z, like see the overall grade for each of these kids in the student summary table as an example, or something like that. That's what this work allows you to do, is you've got the data flowing, you've got the source data already. It's just a matter of manipulating that UI, that user interface or that user experience, so that it's the most easy, the most intuitive, the quickest to get to you know, what's actionable from it for your end users. We have folks that tackle these essential questions as a way to get started with this work sometimes, like, are my students improving over time? Florida Code has done an awesome job of this. You might see the term EQ24, Essential Question 24. We had a whole group of districts and collaboratives come together. Code was a part of it, where they asked questions like, what do we really want to know? We're doing all these assessments and stuff. What do we really want to know from them? And this was one of those key essential questions, is, are my kids improving over time? And so what they did, sorry that the screenshot's a little grainy, but they took the FSA math, like summative scores. They took STAR math interim scores. That was Renaissance STAR was the tool being used for that. And looks like multiple administrations of those interim benchmark assessments. And because the data standard ties them together on the back end on things like standards alignment, you're able to actually make the connection in one user interface fed by multiple sources of data from different assessment platforms to be able to understand, are my kids actually trending toward where we want them to be by the time we take our end of course exams? or are they not? And in which case, as soon as I can know that, as early as I can know that, I can do some things differently. I can course correct. I can shore up areas where they're weak, and maybe I don't have super curricular alignment or instructional materials alignment. I didn't really know about that until I could knit together this data and be more proactive about it. Does that all make sense?
This is the part I like the best, is being able to see the visualizations, because
Yeah.
like you said, that now someone can take action and correct.
Mm-hmm. For sure. This is another view, and I apologize, that screenshot's terrible. But this is just another view that kind of helps you understand, like from the point of view of not just student performance, but performance against certain standards, learning standards, which is really key, because then you can start to see group dynamics and patterns around areas that maybe need a reteach, or that maybe need to be shored up in some way. And it really helps tie together. You remember at the very beginning of our chat, I was telling you this looks like a technology project. It's kind of like disguised as just a technology project. This is where you can really partner the technology expertise that you've got with your instructional leader expertise. And then you kind of have a transformation team for your district, because you're delivering data from systems in a way that can really be consumed and acted upon by your principals, by your teaching and learning specialists at your district level, in your assessment and research group, if you're a big enough district to have one of those. This is an example from San Francisco Unified Schools out in California that shows how they visualized their attendance data and their chronic absenteeism data for their principals and their campus leadership. And so you can see, like, your eye is drawn, I think anyway, your eye is probably drawn to the charts first, like the picture helps tell a story. And then you can drill into the detail in those tiles, the numeric detail and the student list detail, and sort it and filter it for just the campus or the grade level that you need. We also have parent engagement, or caregiver engagement. It's not just for parents, it's really for anybody who's a caregiver of a child. There's a starter kit that we put together all around strengthening family engagement that I don't know if your district was like this, but mine certainly was. Our parent and caregiver user group ended up becoming a bigger and bigger consumer of data for us over the years. And so, you know, like any good IT guy, I rolled out a bunch of tools for them, right? A portal for this, a portal for that, a portal for that. And then guess what? We had a lot of portals and a lot of complexity, I think, for our parents. And so it probably got to the point where it was not very manageable for them. This is another one of these open source tools that we've packaged up and made available to you to be able to knit together and surface the insights that a parent needs from multiple systems. Usually it's from the student information system and the assessment system, especially. There might be others too. But you can see the kinds of things that are flagged here. Even if I've got multiple kiddos in the school system, I can get at a high level the insights I need to just know, is my kid on track? Is my kid not off track? Or is there a specific thing that needs my attention? Like maybe a behavior issue for my 12th grader, my senior, or some assignment, keeping up with assignment issues that my younger kiddo in elementary school is struggling with. And then you can drill into more detail. And then you can do things like surface the student success team. Like if I am, my daughter goes to a high school that's got 3,500 kids in it. I know that place pretty well because I was the assistant soup there before I joined EdFi. But if you don't know a school system as well as I did, you might not know how to navigate the 8 counselors or the 5 assistant principals or the any number of specialists out there for different kinds of program supports. That's just a lot of people and systems to know how to navigate. And like if you're a busy parent and you're working, or if English isn't your first language, there's a bunch of reasons why that might be hard and not intuitive. And so this is a busy slide here, but it's just showing you how you can surface things for your parents in one place that gives them things like, here's your kid's AB schedule. Here's your kid's student success team. Here's the snapshot of on trackness, making up that word, on trackness for being college ready, right? Or other things that are timely kind of milestone wise for your student. I'm going to skip that. We talked about the exchange, so I'm going to skip that too. There is an EdFi Academy that's got training content in it. If anybody's interested in that, just ping me. This is a small group. I'll make sure that you've got my email address here in the chat in just a minute too, so you can actually ping me if you have any follow-up questions. This is just a quote from one of my people I work with a lot, Monica from Boston Public Schools, which really is like they've got a very autonomous kind of district. It's a good sized district, and they have a bunch of site-based decision making that they've empowered their principals to make. So guess what? They have a ton of different tools, and they want it that way. They want principals and school campus leadership to be able to choose the right tool for the job. And so what they need is some way to rationalize that at the district level, like support it, but also harvest data from those things, get data to those products, but also get data back from them. That's kind of what her quote speaks to there. So I've done a lot of talking, and I want to hover for a moment on like, what do you do with some of the stuff that we've been talking about? How do you get started and how do you dig in? And I would call out these things on this slide, and I'm actually going to jump and show you online real quick if we still have a minute. But we've got on our website, we've got a school district sort of landing page that tees up a bunch of these starter kits and these priority use case supports that I've talked about and shown you some examples of. There's really 3 things that you can and should do as great starting points. The first one is just think about what your priority use case is. I've talked about things like chronic absenteeism and local assessment data and college readiness. Like those are some of the ones we've identified that are commonly needed and asked for and valuable across the field. You may have a different one. You may have something that is really critical that you're trying to solve now. Think about what that priority use case is for you. Get plugged into the EdFi community, which I mentioned a moment ago is really painless. It's just a little form. I'll show it to you if you want to see it on the upper right part of our website, edfi.org. There's a community button, and you just fill out a quick little online form, and then it provisions you into all of these different resources and tools. And then I would say, kick the tires on one of these starter kits. That's exactly what they're made for. We give you like sample applications and sample data that you could spin up real fast. And then we give you support and instructions for making that sample app your own and connecting your own data to it. So kick the tires and try one of these starter kits. It's a very low risk thing. There's no cost associated at all. It's just a thing that's out there for you to try. Or talk to Florida Code and join Florida Code. They've got a really cost-effective way to join, which gets you onboarded into a whole bunch of things that other districts have already been doing heavy lifting on that are great starting points for you. And if you will indulge me for a second, I don't know if you've seen this before, but Shane shared this visualizations page with me from Florida Code when we were talking a week or 2 back, that just gives good screenshots and explanations of what I would call kind of the Florida Code version of starter kits, things that are already data visualizations that are already in place that are available to you in this growing library of solutions that you can make use of. So progress monitoring, which is this that essential question about how my students are doing across those multiple assessments that I mentioned. Alignment between and among assessments, another really critical piece, high value work. Are my students improving in math? This is, I think, especially adapted for middle school, but you can configure it for other grade levels, I believe. The early warning system work that I mentioned. And then even things like previously mapped data, like published in use field tested data mappings from vendors that haven't yet supported that API natively yet, but the Florida Code folks have done the work of mapping that data to be able to unlock it and utilize it for things like talent management use cases. And you can see this iReady student diagnostic is another one of those. And peer, which I'm not sure what peer stands for, but that may be one of your required things you've got to report on in the state of Florida.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It's for exceptional education.
Oh, okay, got it.
It's just software where they can fill out their IEPs online.
Got it. On the EdFi site, if you hit this Get Started button up in the upper right corner, that's where you can request a community account if you haven't gotten one yet. Real quick and painless. And then this school district landing page is the one that I mentioned before, where you can get good overview information that might help with spreading the word inside your district. And then you've got all of these different starter kits that are available to you, like chronic absenteeism and strengthening family engagement and such. So with that, I want to hit pause.